Welcome to Speaking of Jesus. Each week we hear real people having a real conversation about Jesus and what he means to them. We want to invigorate you to invite Jesus into your everyday conversations too. So, what do you want to say? Hey, I'm Jessica Bordolo, and I'm here with Dr. Michael Ziegler.
Thank you for joining us.
So this week we're talking about star-crossed love.
I used to think that referred to a couple that was so in love that when they looked at each other, they had stars in their eyes. But I learned that that's not it at all. It's love headed for disaster. And you can even hear that in the word disaster. So aster, you think of astronomy, that means stars. And to dis is to go against something, to cross it. And so to cross the stars is a disaster.
You think of all these generations of people who thought that the future was written in the stars, that your fate is determined by your horoscope, and they would make studies of the stars and the planets to figure out what's going on. So if your stars don't line up with the stars of the one you love, your stars are crossed, and there's nothing you can do about it. Your relationship is doomed. Not that I believe that, because I don't think our future is written in the stars, but that's where the term came from.
And Jessica, as you know well, Shakespeare first penned this term in his famous play, Romeo and Juliet. I've heard that's one of your favorites, right?
Oh, not so much. Not so much.
Yeah, it's there, right in the opening. In the chorus line, he talks about the violence between the two families, and then he calls them a pair of star-crossed lovers.
And then the next line, he tells you that they're going to die. So before the show even starts, you know the ending, and it's not going to be happy.
And that's not the only story of doomed relationships. And that's what we started the conversation with this week. I asked our guests to share a story for them that exemplifies star-crossed love.
My name is Leah, and I would like to talk about the show Crash Landing on You.
My name is John, and my example is Mia and Sebastian from the movie La La Land.
This is Jessica, the Little Mermaid.
And I'm Mike, and John, you took mine, and I couldn't.
Are you
I can't think of another one. I'm for real. I was going to talk about Mia and Sebastian, so we'll just go with that.
What are the chances? I picked that one out of obscurity this morning.
Yeah, well, we just watched that movie recently.
Okay.
I'd never seen it before, but we'll talk about it more.
Yeah, we can riff.
Okay, Leah, I've never heard of this show that you just mentioned, so tell us about that.
I will confess that I got really bored during the pandemic and watched a lot of TV, and I took interest in what people around the world were watching as well. So this show that took off in Korea, the Philippines, China, and Japan was this Korean drama called Crash Landing on You.
It sounds like a disaster already.
It is. It has since made its way to Netflix in the U.S., and it is the story of an heiress from South Korea named Yoon Se-ri, who goes paragliding one day, a storm hits, and she's swept into North Korea and discovered by this brooding, handsome North Korean captain. And so he, of course, wants to turn her in because he is loyal to the North Korean government. And she threatens him by saying, look, if you turn me in, I'm going to tell everybody all the blunders that you and your men made while you were capturing me. So it's 16 episodes of the show. And the goal is to sneak this woman back into South Korea. And no surprise here, of course, along the way, the heiress and the captain fall in love. But come on, North Korea, South Korea, it wasn't going to end well.
Jessica, what was your example?
The Little Mermaid, but not the Disney movie version. Everyone knows this story, right? Sweet, naive little mermaid falls in love with a human on land, but what will she do because she's got a tail? And so then she talks to the sea witch who, connives a bargain, and now she's a human. But the catch is that he has to fall in love with her or she's doomed. And the Disney movie changes the ending and everything's good. And in the original story, he doesn't really like her. Like the prince isn't into the Little Mermaid. And so, boom, headed for disaster. She's gone. She's dead.
Wow.
Isn't that a better story?
No.
Well, when you just summarize it like that, no.
But
I'm sure it's much more compelling.
No, it has
Thank
a
you,
better...
Disney, for saving that.
It has it's way better moral here. The moral of the story was better make sure he is who you think he is before you make any permanent choices, right?
Okay.
Instead of she didn't know him. She just saw him.
So is that the one you tell your kids?
Oh, yeah. It's a morality tale. Absolutely. I would rather them, because in the movie, she's like a rebellious teenager. She goes against her father, and it all works out. She did not know him. Very foolish. And so people should know that doesn't end well for you.
You don't have Sebastian the Crab singing Kiss the Girl.
Yeah, or Flounder.
I love the Disney movie, The Little Mermaid. It's a fabulous watch. I like it. I'm not going to diss it. But the lesson is not so hot.
Fair enough. Speaking of Sebastian, John, you and I were on the same wavelength
Oh,
here.
there's
you
a
with that
tie-in.
transition.
Nice.
Yeah, look at that.
Smooth as glass.
What are the chances that you and I would come up with the same answer out of all of the examples of star-crossed lovers?
Well, like I said, we just watched this recently. I hadn't seen it. It came out probably, 4 or 5 years ago?
4 years ago?
La La
3 years
Land?
ago.
3 years, okay.
3 years
so
ago,
I didn't see it, and my family all saw it, and they said, oh, it's such a great movie. I'm like, it's kind of lame. It's a musical. I don't want to watch a musical. Yeah, Jessica's giving me a look right now. It was such a good movie. It was so good.
Good for you. I'm seeing what happens when you broaden your horizons.
I just was so captivated. I like the combination of the complete fantasy of the movie, that they can just break out into song in the middle of a traffic jam. Everything can just be turned into a song, and it's all good. But then
How's that weird? I do that all the time.
Yeah, it's incredible. It sets it off as like this: anything is possible, and we'll just break into a song, and it's all good. But then the whole love story is a kind of a tragedy.
But you still get transfixed with their relationship.
Yeah, and you want it to work out, and it doesn't.
It does not.
It doesn't.
It does not at all.
But
It was
it's
a
still-
super bummer.
Let's talk about what bothers you about these kinds of stories of star-crossed love that's headed for disaster.
All of these stories are in contrast to the first style of story that we were all introduced to, and that would be fairy tales. And in a fairy tale, if anybody has any hangups or a problem, all of that is erased as soon as a fairy godmother shows up and takes it away. And so you know that it's all going to end well, but then we watch these movies and read these books, and the fairy godmother doesn't show up. And we want her to, and we think that maybe she will, but it doesn't happen.
It's the contrast of they lived happily ever after. And that's interesting. Like Jessica, your example, I didn't know that there was the original tragic version of The Little Mermaid.
It's Hans Christian Andersen. But the original version of a lot of these fairy tales are violent and sad-ended.
Hansel and Gretel?
Hansel and Gretel. In the original Cinderella, sure, she ends up with the prince in the end, but her stepsisters end up, cutting off their toes and heels, trying to get their feet into that slipper. The original version of a lot of these fairy tales are more like morality tales, where you do something stupid and you end by dying violently, and that's the end of the story.
Yeah, my friend was even telling me that Frozen is based off of one of those that's just it's not great. There's no cute snowman.
It's based off The Snow Queen, which we did in children's theater when I was in college. It was a really fun show. But yeah, the Snow Queen is evil, selfish, and she freezes people for her own benefit. And yeah, these original fairy tales, man, they're no Disney movie.
Jarring. They are not what we are used to expecting. What else bothers you about them?
Well, I guess after you've seen one once and you kind of see the writing on the wall, there's a thing that is inside of you that is begs for reconciliation, that really wants the thing to work out. But you see these people walking headlong into disaster, and it is just really hard to watch because you're you should know better. Don't do this.
I agree. I think the you should know better gets at what bothers me about these stories. Yeah, when Mia tells Sebastian that she doesn't like jazz, you know that this is going to end badly because he's all about that.
Yeah, he embodies this love for jazz. He hangs out with jazz people. He wears jazz suits. He's friends with John Legend.
Yeah. And the first thing she says is, I don't really like jazz. Okay, so they are jarring. They make you hurt for the people because you can see them walking into this disaster. But there's something compelling about them. What makes them compelling? What makes them human?
There are two things that stand out for me. The first is we all grew up listening to fairy tales, but then we got older and we realized that that's not real life. And so when this messy love story comes at you, there's something relatable to it because your life is a mess too.
We've all made those choices before. I think we all have looked and said, we should know better, but there's something really compelling about this situation that draws me deeper in. And I think we also want that for ourselves. So we somewhat empathize with the characters who are in the story too.
And so you kind of feel bad for them. Oh, you just didn't know any better. It's not like you're a malicious, conniving person who is in love with the wrong person. You're just stupid or naive or just a baby.
The relationship is going to be sacrificed so that they grow as people.
Or die.
Or you grow as the watcher of this. It's not happily ever after, but you leave wiser, a little more seasoned to the world because of it.
I think they're valuable because the characters are doomed and the characters die so that we're not doomed, right? They're like warning. It's sad to watch these sad things happen, but better that they happen to someone in a book or movie. It's too bad, but it will save you from actual stupidness.
Using La La Land as an example, though, I'm not like Jessica. Sorry, I don't want anyone to cut their toes off. I just want everybody to live happily ever after. So La La Land
I don't
ends.
want them to die and cut their toes off.
I'm sitting next to my mom in the theater and La La Land ends and they're not a couple and that's not my style. And I'm thinking, wait, what happened here? Here's where I confess. I spent 24 hours watching this Korean drama, reading subtitles, knowing that it wasn't going to end the way I wanted it to. But I had every possible scenario in my head of how it could. He could defect to South Korea. She could stay in North Korea. They could both run off to the U.S. None of it happened. Thank you, John. Yeah, see, you're upset. Like, I should be embarrassed.
I didn't even invest that much time in it. But
24 hours of reading subtitles for nothing.
As Leah's telling about Crash Landed on You, John's like tearing up and Jessica's just smiling. All right, let's tie into the portion of scripture we're going to be listening to today, beginning with the widow's mite.
I was really interested in seeing where you were going to go with this. You're usually very creative, insightful in the themes that you kind of pull out of the scripture passages, but I did not see how star-crossed love had anything to do with it. Hey, but I trusted you. You always pull it off. I trusted you were going to do it. I was just really curious to see how.
You stick along for the ride. See where it's going to go. At the end of Mark chapter 12, we meet a devoted widow. She's devoted to God and to his temple. But the people who are running the temple, we've learned, they are corrupt. They've been spending the temple offerings on themselves. Jesus himself has already condemned the temple. He said that it's a den of bandits. That is, it's the place where the robbers go to count their loot after they've taken it from innocent people. So we know that it's doomed. We know that it's going to be headed for disaster. In 40 years, in fact, the whole temple is going to be destroyed. But the widow doesn't know this. We do as readers, but she doesn't. And then Mark strings together another account of a devoted woman. She's devoted to her teacher, Jesus. And like the temple, Jesus is also headed for destruction, for disaster. He's going to suffer and die in a few days. And so in that way, both women show love or devotion to someone or something that is headed for disaster. So a drastic change is coming. Jesus taught in the temple in Jerusalem, and in his teaching he said, "Beware of the scribes, who like to walk around in long robes and desire greetings in the marketplaces and the best seats, in the synagogues and the places of honor at feasts. The ones who devour widows' houses and for a pretense make long prayers, they will receive the harshest judgment." And taking a seat opposite the treasury, Jesus watched the people putting money in the offering box in the temple. And many rich people put in large sums. But a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which make a penny. And calling his disciples, he said to them, "I'm telling you the truth. This poor widow put in more than all who put money in the offering box. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything she had, all that she had to live on." And as he was going out of the temple courts, one of his disciples says to him, "Teacher, look, what wonderful stones, what wonderful buildings." And Jesus said to him, "You see all these buildings? There will not be left here one stone standing upon another. They will all be thrown down." Now it was 2 days before the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And the chief priests and the scribes were seeking some sly way that they could arrest him and kill him. But they were saying, "Not during the feast, otherwise the people will riot." And while Jesus was in Bethany, at the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at the table, a woman came carrying an alabaster flask of ointment, pure nard, very costly. And she broke the flask and poured it over his head. And there were some standing there saying to themselves indignantly, "Why was this ointment wasted like that? This ointment could have been sold for a year's wages and given to the poor." And they scolded her. "Leave her alone," Jesus said. "Why do you give her grief? She has done a beautiful work for me. For the poor you will always have with you, and whenever you truly desire, you can do good for them. But me, you are not always going to have me." That which she has come to understand, she did. She went ahead and anointed my body for its burial. And truly, I say to you, wherever this gospel, wherever this good news is proclaimed in all the world, what she has done will be talked about publicly in memory of her. What was a word or a phrase that got your attention hearing it this time?
All she had.
A year's wages.
Yeah, it's 300 denarii. So that's a day's wage times 300, about a year's wages. Jessica, what was the word that got you?
When Jesus said that the woman acted out of the knowledge of what she has come to know, or she had acted out of what she had come to understand.
Yeah, that gets me too. This commentary that I've been reading and talking about from Dr. Veltz, he translates it that way to make that really clear, that you don't always get that in other translations. So yeah, I definitely want to talk more about that. Okay, Leah, all that she had.
When I read this last night in my Bible, all that she had was in reference to woman number one, but there's a similar statement for woman number two, and that was done what she could. It's noted that both women gave it all, and that's worth highlighting, that they left nothing on the table.
So I like to think I like to give big gifts, but holy cow, like a year's wages is so much. That is way over the top. So how much do you have to know that this is Christ? In order to do that.
I think the first woman, the widow, it would be an example of somebody who doesn't know what they know. So she has gone all in, presumably out of her devotion to the Lord, that she was doing under the old covenant what was called of her, what was required of her. She was giving everything she had to that, but she doesn't know that. And I think the veiled criticism to her is our instinct as a reader, as a listener. Because if you've been listening to the Gospel of Mark since chapter 11, Jesus has had nothing good to say about the temple. Immediately preceding this account, you just hear that the scribes are devouring the widow's houses. They're exploiting them. They're taking advantage of them. And then she gives her money to that?
And here she gave all she had to the Lord, but it was actually eaten by an institution that was corrupt.
Yeah, so Jesus praises her when our instinct may be to criticize her. Jessica, tell us about she did what she came to understand.
Usually the translation I've heard says she did what she could. Jesus said she did what she could. And then you said, in the translation that you used from Dr. Veltz, that she gave out of her. Can you read it again? What were the actual words?
That which she has come to understand, she did. She went ahead and anointed my body for its burial.
It's totally leading to the idea that she did understand. That the times before this and just a few chapters before, when Jesus starts talking about how I'm going to have to die, I'm going to have to leave, and his disciples are like, no, don't talk like that. And Peter's like, no, don't say that. Don't talk like that. But she understood it. And so she acted on what she had come to know. That gives a whole new depth to what she did. That it wasn't just, I would like Jesus' hair to smell nice. I know that he's going to die because he said so, and I believe him. And in that culture, it was they would anoint the bodies with certain ointments and oils. And she wanted to give Jesus the best of that.
There's not just the 12 disciples. There's a whole large group around Jesus, and they're all going up to Jerusalem. And the gospel writer Luke tells us that there were many women who were supporting him out of their own private means even. So there's this larger group. And they all have heard Jesus teaching, just like the 12 disciples have. They've heard him, and Mark tells us he told them 3 times, we're going up to Jerusalem, the Son of Man's going to be killed, but 3 days later he will rise. They don't understand. But she has come to understand and believe that, just like you said, if she's going to anoint him for burial, she's got to do it now, because there's not going to be time for it later. He's going to rise from the dead.
Yeah, they never get to. The women come to the tomb with the spices and things, and he's gone. That's amazing.
It is amazing. And also, I just know that the women in my life are way better communicators than the men in my life, so they just listen better. So
they pick up on these things.
All the rest of the disciples are like, yeah, what you said, but what I said. And then she's just like, yeah, I'll just listen to what he's saying. And he literally says it 3 times. And she's like, guys don't get it, but I'm going to get it.
I don't love this story because there's a competition between men and women or anything like that. It's just, when I hear a story about a woman in the Bible, it's like, oh, like me. And so that there would be somebody like me that got it.
It's almost as if representation matters.
He secures her place in the gospel telling. That's just amazing. This gospel, wherever this gospel is proclaimed in all the world, what she has done will be talked about publicly in memory of her.
And he said it in front of her, and she heard it.
A friend of mine, we do this live performance of the Gospel of Mark, my friend David Schmidt, when he delivers this line, it's so good. He moves like he's stepping in front of her to take the criticism, and he says, "Leave her alone." With so much power and emotion. And it's like, he's just, no, you're not gonna criticize her right now.
Just like Jesus did for the children that the disciples are trying to stop from coming to him. It says Jesus was indignant. Don't stop them from coming to me.
And that the first woman, the widow, apparently she never heard Jesus praise her. There's no indication that he even talked to her. We get to hear about it. We don't always get to hear Jesus speak up for us, but this reminds me that he does. He will, even if I don't hear it immediately. What do you get to know more deeply about Jesus by listening to these 2 women placed together? Both of their devotion is headed for disaster in 2 similar yet different ways.
Part of being a human being is the desire to be seen. I think it's a greater desire for intimacy, but I think the desire to be seen and to be known is in us. And Jesus is a seer. So in the first instance, he sees the woman even when she doesn't know that he sees her. And then in the second instance, he makes it known to everybody in that room that he sees the intent behind this lavish act. Where this woman pours this oil from her alabaster container onto his head. And that's cool. That's he knows your heart and he sees you when you're wrestling with things and you are known fully by Jesus. That is pretty cool to me.
God doesn't look at it the way humans look at it. He saw it as sacrifice and love. And so these insignificant, unfruitful, hopeless acts were not at all to him.
Yeah, and the contrast of them. So these 2 small copper coins, which make a penny, this is 1/64th of a day's wage. It's just nothing. It's silly. And we could easily look at it and dismiss it. Other side of the scale, a year's wages. And we could also dismiss it as reckless and foolish, but that's not how Jesus places value.
And that's not how he places value on people either, that he noticed people who might not have had a place to belong or felt like they were part of the people who had power at the time, right? Oh, that woman, she's, just dropping in pennies. Now, oh, that woman, she's wasting her money. That's what the people, the powerful people said, or the smart people. But God noticed something different about these people, and he noticed their motivation and their love, and he noticed it, right? It doesn't earn them a higher place with him. It doesn't earn more love from Jesus. He doesn't want people to not belong, and he brings them in.
He's already given what they could never earn. He's already given everything to everyone, but it brings him joy. It brings him pleasure to see this and to comment on it. So I think that's the other thing, that he doesn't just see it and notice it. He speaks up for these women. He praises the one does the same for the other. And she doesn't have to defend herself. My inclination is I got to give my justification as to why I'm doing this. I got to give my account. See, I understood that he's going to die and he's going to rise and I got to do this now. But she doesn't have to do any of that. He defends her.
That is my favorite part, that he steps up in between the criticism of others and these women and defends them. That's my favorite.
Just kind of to reiterate the last point, just Jesus is a safe bet. It's not, stupid. It's a worthwhile investment of your time. It's completely worth trusting Jesus and having him inform the way you live and giving him everything you can in return.
He's worth it. He's good for it.
Yeah, this isn't a case of star-crossed love. It's not an infatuation or a belief based on naivety or simplicity or simple-mindedness. That's not what this is. This is about a decision of a lifelong commitment that God has made to us. That's real love. That's what real love is. It's not this infatuation stuff that's in all these love stories.
What is star-crossed about it is not the infatuation, but the real disaster we will all walk through.
Yeah, I wasn't dissing your point. I thought, it's a good analogy. I wasn't doing that. I was just thinking
You're just
about
importing this other definition of star-crossed love.
Yeah.
I'm getting the sense that you are misunderstanding what I'm trying to say by star-crossed love and what it means.
I know that's what you thought. I could tell.
Yeah. It doesn't mean immature infatuation. It means love headed for disaster. That's how I'm defining it.
You're right. I wasn't being clear. At that point in the conversation, I was kind of combining ideas. The more important thing that I was trying to say was that the ultimate end of the story for the women in Mark's account wasn't tragic, like star-crossed love stories, because their love was built on something solid that couldn't fail. Nothing could stop it, not even the stars.
You're right. It's an analogy.
What was that? Can you just say that again?
You're right.
Oh,
you're right.
okay.
So it's an analogy. It's not a tragedy in a technical sense. When I worked with this metaphor, I even played with the wording. Originally, I had started saying that it was love doomed for disaster. I had to change my verbiage to make it connect to say love headed for disaster, to allow that hopeful turn at the end, which we know is in the story of Jesus. It's not tragic in that sense, but I think you'd agree it still has tragic elements, right?
But it didn't stay that way. And that's the difference between star-crossed love, right? The purpose of the temple was fulfilled in Jesus. Jesus didn't stay dead. So the women could be close to the one that they loved forever. So then it's not a star-crossed love story, because those end tragically and theirs ends joyfully.
Again, I had to rephrase it to say love that was headed for disaster.
But you still said star-crossed love, and that's the question we went with.
But star-crossed just means headed for disaster. But if you are with the creator of the stars, hey, there can be something on this other side of disaster. Maybe you could call it tragicomic, kind of has elements of both. Or I'll quote one of your favorite authors, J.R.R. Tolkien. He's used this phrase, eucatastrophe. Have you ever heard that phrase? It's
no.
A eucatastrophe. So eu is the prefix that means good. So a eucatastrophe is a good catastrophe.
Yeah, well, maybe that should have been your opening question then.
Well,
Let's get back to the conversation.
We'll do that another one. We'll do that another time. How's this good news for you right now? I think for me, it's just that I don't have to defend myself. I don't have to try to answer criticism. I live before God and his son, Jesus. I care about what they say. I care about what Jesus says. And I know what he says about me. I know that he loves me.
Well, going with what you said, Mike, I don't have to defend myself to others. I don't have to defend myself to myself. I think I look at sometimes my contribution and am overly critical of it and not seeing it the way God sees it. We've talked a lot about generosity today, and the way I view my generosity is this is an issue between God and Leah, and we're working on it together because some days it's easier than others. So if there's growth to happen in regards to my generosity, I don't have to beat myself up over it either. God and I are working on this together.
And like you said, through a gospel lens, and that's how it worked with this woman, that she listened to Jesus. She understood that he's going to sacrifice his life for an atonement, a ransom, a covering for the sins of the world, and he's going to rise again. So she listens, and then she understands, and then she does. She's acting out of that response to the good news of Jesus.
I think when the moment is upon you as a child of God to do something bold or outlandish for Christ, if it's to witness to a family member that's difficult to reach, or give generously and not always be sure what that means for you and your ability to have things, to go for it and to be hopeful. Because I love John's attitude of, we have this ride or die God, and isn't that what we all want on our relationships on earth? And sometimes we find it and sometimes we don't, but with God, we always do.
Leah's final point is such good news. No matter what the tragedy that we're living through in this world, God's love is a sure bet. Our entire life might seem star-crossed. It might seem like it's headed for disaster and then that's it. But through faith in Jesus, that's not where the story ends. He sees us through that. And we get to be with the one we love. We get to be with Jesus in the presence of God the Father and the Holy Spirit forever.
That's why it's better than a story of star-crossed love. The analogy is great, though, Mike. I thought it was a really good opening question, and it draws a contrast between stories of doomed love and our ultimate love story with God who loves us and has taken away our destruction. So I'm not rejecting your opening question. I was just drawing the contrast. It was made for a good conversation.
Sometimes the best insights come when you recognize the limits of the comparison or the metaphor. So it's got its limits, and it's good to identify those. Maybe another angle on it is to think about how we often talk about these two accounts from the perspective of tithing and giving our offerings to the Lord. That's certainly an important theme, but there are other things that we can learn about this in terms of self-sacrifice, giving of yourself, even if it feels like you're headed for disaster. For me, one of the lessons from the women isn't just how much money you give, but giving your whole self over to faith in God. That's not easy, to give up the parts of yourself or parts of your life that make you feel secure or comfortable, but sometimes those things get in the way of our relationship with God, or they get in the way of serving Him, and that's when we are called to walk away from them.
That might be as scary as giving up your last 2 pennies or a year's wages. There was another thing that you said, Mike. In this life, people may criticize us unfairly or treat us like our contributions just don't matter, but that we don't need to defend ourselves to gain their approval or fight to be noticed for the good things we're trying to do. Because God notices, God sees, and we are answerable to Him. The woman didn't anoint Jesus to earn the approval of the disciples, right? She did it to serve Jesus.
And when some of the disciples were diminishing her act of service, publicly accusing her and criticizing her, Jesus put His foot down. He defended her in front of everyone. He protected her. He said that her act of service was precious, was beautiful to Him.
That image is the best news that I can imagine. Because ultimately, Jesus will protect me from the judgment that I actually do deserve. Because He will step between me and the accusations of the devil and say, no, leave her alone. She's with me. Thanks for being a part of the conversation today. You can listen to past episodes on our website, jesuspodcast.org, or wherever you like to find podcasts.
And please leave us a rating and a review today. It helps us make sure that this show will continue. We can share it with more people, and we love to read what you have to say. You're invited to be a part of our Facebook group. It's called Speaking of Jesus. You can see pictures of our guests this week and interact with what you've heard.
Next week, we'll discuss one of those Bible stories that we just never talk about. The one in Mark where a naked guy runs through the Garden of Gethsemane. Yeah, what's that about? We pray that this week's podcast has encouraged you in your faith and has invigorated you to speak of His love into the lives of those around you. See you next week. As always, we'll hear from Dr. Ziegler in a real conversation between real people speaking of Jesus. What do you want to say?
You're invited to be a part of our Spacebook.
Our Spacebook. Facebook.